U.S. President Joe Biden has warned Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu that the U.S. policy around Gaza could change if Israel doesn't take new steps in its war against Hamas. The U.S. Secretary of State laid out what Biden told Netanyahu.
He made clear the need for Israel to announce a series of specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. He made clear that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps.
For what this change by the U.S. could mean for the war in Gaza, Randa Slim is the senior fellow at the Middle East Institute, and she joins me now. Randa, it's good to speak with you again.
Good to be with you, David.
We have heard language from the United States before about the need to take steps to protect civilians and aid workers. I've never heard them say our approach to the war in Gaza depends on these immediate changes. What do you make of this move by the United States?
Well, we are the United States government, particularly the president, is finally transitioning from the state of unconditional support for Israel to a state of potentially conditional support of Israel, with maybe sanctions on the table, maybe with conditions put on arms support, military support from the United States to Israel. But as I said, it's a transition. We'll see, whether he's going to move forward. But given the language that was issued based on the readout of the call between the two leaders by the White House, I don't think that unless Netanyahu comes up with a drastic change in the way that Israel has been conducting, this war, this assault, I don't think that Biden is not going to have to impose some conditions on Israel going forward. It's going to be very hard. He has to. The rhetoric has changed. It's still rhetoric, but the quality of the rhetoric, the quality of the change is much more different than before, and it has now to be followed by actions, right, if there is no drastic change by Israel.
So I watched the briefing today with John Kirby, who's the spokesperson on national security issues for the government. Takes a lot of the questions on this particular conflict. He kept saying, "What's the or else?" and he wouldn't give specifics on this, but he kept saying, "We need to see what Israel does in the hours and days ahead." So this is not something with a long horizon on it for them to see something from Israel before they respond. How do you think Benjamin Netanyahu will respond? How Israel will respond? Because to this point, they don't seem to have made the kind of changes the president and other Western allies have insisted upon.
I think, Netanyahu faces a crisis. Either he's going to lose his only international ally left right now, meaning the United States, or he's going to use allies in his governing council. Because the kind of drastic change that is going to get the president attention and is going to, help reduce some of the anger that exists in this country, including among the strongest support base of the president himself, I think is going to create trouble for Netanyahu with his own right-wing allies in his government. And so he is facing, which is going to be the less costly of these options, losing the United States and the support of the president, or losing his allies in the governing council.
It's interesting because... Right, yeah, in the war cabinet and in the coalition that he's built, right?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm thinking of a different country here.
Yeah, okay. I gotcha. But it's interesting, though, the domestic political considerations that Netanyahu has to weigh. Biden is also weighing domestic political considerations. We saw protest votes in Michigan and in Wisconsin and some key states with large Arab American populations that potentially threaten, if they're so demotivated, it threatens his presidential rematch with Donald Trump in the fall of this year. So it seems like the domestic pressure on both sides is an important thing that filters up to the international relationships, the bilateral relationships between the two. Where do you see that relationship potentially going? Because even sort of laying this condition out there from the White House suggests that things are going to be very different tomorrow than they are today.
I mean, I don't see this relationship fracturing. It's historical, is deeply anchored in the history of the two countries, in the social fabrics of the two countries. I mean, also we have to take into consideration that Netanyahu is facing his own domestic pressure about the return of the hostages, the negotiation, and also a good part of the call based on the readout is this urgency or this pressure or call by the president on Netanyahu to empower his own negotiators to reach a deal over a ceasefire and the hostage release. And that is particularly, this particular part of the readout is addressed to the thousands of Israelis who have been demonstrating outside the prime minister's residences and offices calling for the return of the hostages. So, I mean, Netanyahu can put up pressure on Biden domestically, but also Biden is trying to increase the pressure on Netanyahu domestically. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this is going to play out. Now, we have to also factor in, what is Iran going to do? You know, there is a potential response from Iran in retaliation for the Israeli attack on its consulate in Damascus and the killing of senior IRGC generals. And so the question is, will Tehran, order some kind of a ballistic missile attack on Tel Aviv, or will it order its proxies in the different fronts that are now being fought, with Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the Iraqi militias via Syria? Will it order them to attack, Israel via drone missiles? So it's going to be interesting. The situation right now is very complicated in the region, domestically in the two countries, and internationally.
You said you don't think the Israel-U.S. relationship will fracture. I think you're right on that because of the historic connection there. But could the Biden-Netanyahu relationship fracture? I mean, we saw that speech that Chuck Schumer gave in the Senate, a Jewish Senate leader for the Democrats saying Bibi Netanyahu's got to go, he's lost his way. I mean, do you think this could be the beginning of a shift of that kind of magnitude and a fracture between the two leaders, if not the two countries?
I think so. I think definitely the unconditional support that Biden thought he needed to provide to Netanyahu and to Israel to influence him as a policy, as a strategy, I think now he's convinced it has failed. And so he's definitely shifting toward a new strategy, conditional supports, threat of sanctions. And whether it's going to fracture relationship, I don't know. But whether there was a very good relationship between them, also it's something to be debated. But definitely is going to put this relationship, personal relationship, which Biden has really worked hard to maintain, under threat.
So just as a final point, I know you talked about the potential for escalation because of the various militias and proxies aligned with Iran. We've seen this in the United States. There's also pushback coming from the United Kingdom. A lot of countries lost civilians, in this aid strike that Israel says was an accident. What do you think all of this means, this U.S. shift in particular today, for the broader international view of the way Israel is doing this war against Hamas?
I mean, I'm really sorry for every death that has happened, but also it is, for me, to be very honest, as an American, it's sad that it took the death of 6 Westerners to provoke this kind of reaction from the United States president, and not the death of 32,000 innocent Palestinians. I mean, for me, I'm happy that there is a shift in U.S. policy, but I would have liked to see it before. And maybe if that shift has happened before, maybe would have avoided a lot of death, not only among the Palestinians, but also the unfortunate accident. The unfortunate death. It's not an accident. The head of World Kitchen Central is saying it's not an accident. It's it's a targeting of these cars. It's a specific targeting of these cars in an area that is controlled by the Israelis, by the Israeli Defense Forces. And so, in a way, I'm happy that the shift is happening, but I wish that shift has started to happen not 6 months after the start of the war, but 6 months before, as soon as possible. And maybe we could have avoided a lot of death.
Randa Slim, always appreciate the time. Randa Slim is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. Thanks so much.
Thank you.